They failed. Early on the fourth day, the orbital drifted into the upper layers of the atmosphere and, wrapped in flame, plunged to the surface. The explosion was visible even from our distance. Apparently, unlike the orbitals of Corona 1, this station had no compensators. There, falling giants caused only local disasters. Here, the whole planet trembled. The dictatorship fleet had found an effective and terrifying strategy against planetary defenses. It made me wonder how Corona 1 had held out so long. Perhaps the answer lay in the fact that such technologies, and the resources to build them, had only become available after the war. Thanks to the Federation Treaty, that I caught myself in a dark realization. I no longer saw much difference between the dictatorship and the Commonwealth. To me, they'd become almost indistinguishable. Our fleet. Huh. Attention, all hands, came the captain's voice through the intercom. Phase 3 begins in 2 fleet hours. Mission remains unchanged. Sector 32 clearance. That is all. Well, God help us, murmured Alex from the seat beside me. Our exit into the designated sector went without surprises. The destroyer settled into orbit, scanning its assigned grid for signs of enemy activity. But the enemy stayed hidden. No signs of life. Even the small city beneath us, under close surveillance, seemed abandoned. Perhaps the inhabitants had taken refuge in forests or bunkers, fearing bombardment. The monotonous scan dragged on for nearly 3 hours. Nothing moved below, but their attempts at concealment weren't perfect. Near the end of the 3rd hour, the speakers came to life again. Attention, all personnel. Active phase of Operation 3 commencing. Man your stations. Readiness in 1 minute. I had never witnessed an orbital bombardment in person. Probably never would. Probably shouldn't, the destroyer shuddered. Once. Then again. Distant, muffled booms echoed through the corridors. Silence. Another jolt. A faint, intermittent whistling sound, barely perceptible, from the ground. The tiny speck in the sky must have seemed like the embodiment of the apocalypse. Buildings collapsing under guided bombs. Fortified positions crumpling beneath gravity. Pulses. Machinery incinerated by swarms of missiles. Up here, just a little turbulence. Alert. Alert. Prepare for incoming attack. For a second, I didn't understand. We were the ones attacking. But the next second, everything turned upside down. The floor tilted violently. I tried to raise my arms for balance, but my limbs suddenly felt like they were made of lead. My chair gave way, shattering beneath me, and I hit the floor hard. The last thing I saw before the crimson darkness claimed my vision was the monitor in front of me exploding into a spray of cheerful glass fragments. Then, blackness that I don't know how long I was unconscious. But eventually, I came to gravity. Felt normal again. But my surroundings were completely changed. Through a bloodstained haze, I stared blankly for several seconds at Alex's body. Impaled on a piece of his own chair, his torso dusted with tiny shards of glass, my brain refused to process it. Then, finally, a voice pierced the fog, monotonous, emotionless, repeating something over the intercom. I forced my thoughts into focus. Vessel. Repeat. Emergency situation. Planetary crash is inevitable. Time to impact, 17 minutes. Proceed to the nearest evacuation module and abandon ship. Repeat. Thoughts started to snap into place. The destroyer had been hit by some kind of gravitational weapon. A strong one, considering we were in freefall. I had 17 minutes left. I needed to find Adele. Adele? I jerked my arm. Pain exploded through my body. But the communicator still worked. Come on. The contacted person left the ship 12 minutes ago. Connection impossible. I exhaled, part relief, part frustration. On one hand, I was still worried. On the other, there was nothing I could do for her now. I had to focus on surviving. Inevitable. Time to impact, 16 minutes. Damn it. I staggered upright and stumbled into the corridor. The nearest escape pod was just 10 meters away, but my brain was already leaping ahead. Hostile planet down there. I'd need weapons. Showing up unarmed in front of angry locals would be unwise that I made it to my quarters just as the voice announced 10 minutes remaining. 2 minutes later, I emerged, armed with a pistol, a rifle, and a thin bag of essentials. Help! Came a groan from a nearby compartment that I didn't stop. Just kept walking toward the closest escape module. Why should I care about another dying enemy? One more or less. What difference did it make? There were, as if by design, exactly 2 seats left in the module. 2. For a few moments, I weighed my options. If I managed to save the guy, I might receive a decent commendation later. And if Command somehow retrieved the data from the destroyer and saw I had left a wounded comrade to die, damn it. 6 minutes until impact, swearing viciously under my breath, I dropped my rifle and bag to the floor and, still unsteady, ran back. My body was recovering quickly, but the process wasn't complete yet. Thank you, man. The communications lieutenant I was dragging toward the capsule was on the verge of tears, from the pain in his broken leg and from the overwhelming relief of not having to burn with the ship. Come on, come on, I know it hurts. Stuffing him into the cramped interior of the capsule turned out to be harder than I expected. 2 minutes, I shoved a medkit into the lieutenant's hands, ripped from the wall, and slammed the red button. Done. Mission accomplished. His fate was no longer in my hands. Snatching up the rifle and bag, I squeezed myself into the second chamber. I hit my own button and began strapping in. The hatch sealed shut with a hiss, pressurized, and then the capsule shot out of the ship with a jolt of acceleration. Hopefully, the system would work as it was supposed to, after a few seconds of chaotic spinning, during which my stomach desperately tried to escape my body. The capsule began to stabilize. If I remembered the theory correctly, it would now pretend to be a detached chunk of hull until the very last moment, when it would jettison the compensators and make a semi-soft landing that a screen lit up in front of me, displaying the terrain below, and made me swear out loud. The capsule was dropping toward the outskirts of a town. A stupid place, from an infantryman's point of view. I could have hidden well in a forest or swamps. I could have gotten lost in the concrete jungle of a real city. But here, low-rise residential buildings, 1 or 2 stories high, scattered with lonely trees. I cursed again, watching the ground rush up toward me. Once again, the compensators amazed me. I was still alive. The capsule, having burned off most of the momentum, slammed down between 2 houses and popped open its hatch, inviting me out. Blood trickled from my nose, as usual, and my vision blurred into double. Screw it. I was back on solid ground. I was infantry again. Enemies would soil themselves at the sound of my footsteps. I was death incarnate. That was when I stumbled and banged my head on the capsule's doorway, and the self-hypnosis abruptly ended. Something exploded in the distance. The ground gave a noticeable jolt. I guess the destroyer had finally met its end. Rest in pieces. Jamming a couple of gauze pads from the medkit into my nose, I stuffed it back into my bag, slung the rifle across my chest, and checked the pistol. Everything was in order, everything worked. Time to move. The high-rises looked to be about 2 kilometers away. 10 minutes at a run. Would I make it before the locals woke up and organized a manhunt? Probably not. I'd already caught a glimpse of a frightened, curious face in one of the windows, which vanished the instant it saw me. The dizziness slowly faded, and my run, clumsy and awkward at first, smoothed out and gained speed. I even let myself believe I might make it into the city. But no. About half a kilometer from the outskirts, 3 vehicles came around the corner ahead of me. Low, aggressive-looking. Definitely not civilian. Something flipped in my head, and the familiar combat calm flooded my brain. The first seconds of contact are crucial. Whoever reacts faster wins. That I ripped the rifle from my shoulder, dropped to the ground, and rolled to the edge of the road. A few precious moments while I caught my breath and the scope searched for a target. Tactics for engaging lightly armored foes flashed through my mind. Everything sounds easy when you're sitting in a classroom. My finger, almost acting on its own, pressed the upper trigger. You can shoot at armored vehicles with a Series 500 rifle using standard rounds. With decent results, even. But right now I needed surprise, something to throw a wrench into their plans. The rifle spat a plasma round instead of a bullet. Too bad it was a sniper mod version, the plasma mag only. Held 10 rounds, and I hadn't bothered to grab spares. The left side of the lead vehicle burst into flames. The front wheel couldn't take the heat, exploded, and spun the car sideways. A second later, the engine blew, flinging flaming debris in every direction. People scrambled out of the burning wreck. I held my breath and squeezed the trigger again. Standard rounds this time. Bang, bang, bang. The soldiers, or maybe cops, who knew, fell like bowling pins. Someone managed to return fire, but another shot flung him backward, arms splayed out on the burning pavement. The key was to keep up. The pressure. The enemy was disoriented now, but that wouldn't last. Bang. The men from the two remaining vehicles spread out, partially shielded by their cars and the flames. But I had one of the best assault rifles in this whole damn sector. Bang. A shot to the leg sent one soldier screaming, writhing on the ground. Someone rushed to help him. Bang. The helper's head snapped back, and he dropped beside the injured man. Bang. Another wounded soldier howled on the far side. Someone bolted toward the fence, never made it. 2 rounds in the back took him down. Bang. A plasma round splashed under one of the vehicles, washing over the area in a firestorm. Burned men rolled and crawled, trying to scatter. I fired without stopping, shooting by instinct. The magazine ran dry. Fire ahead, bodies strewn across the road, complete chaos. Time to run. I vaulted over a fence and sprinted through private property, swapping out my mag on the go. For left, plus 8 more plasma shots. I'd make it. The next 5 minutes were a blur of running, closing in on the city. Finally, solid buildings appeared. Abandoned machinery stood unattended. Looked like an industrial zone. The perfect place to vanish. Too bad it would also be easy to cordon off and search with dogs. I needed something underground, like a sewer. Somewhere that'd block scent and infrared. Then again, who knows? IR scanners probably penetrated a few meters of dirt anyway. A low-flying flyer appeared nearby. Definitely not one of ours, which meant it was after me. Using the element of surprise, I propped my rifle on a crawler's track and aimed at the creeping aircraft. Showtime. I had to fire 10 times in a row, 2 kilometers away. Under these conditions, only movie snipers hit on the first try. I had no idea how many rounds connected, but suddenly the craft shuddered in my scope, tilted, and started spiraling toward the ground. Direct hit. I moved on. Found a rusty barrel of used engine oil, soaked my legs with it, then covered myself entirely for good measure. Hopefully that would throw off the dogs. Then again, who knows? I spent nearly an hour wandering the construction site, searching for shelter. Eventually, I found a stack of building blocks with a small but deep crevice in between, offering 3 escape routes. I squeezed in, shivered at the thought of being crushed by a tremor, but stayed anyway. The hardest part was ahead, waiting. The battle rush wore off. A mild adrenaline chill set in. The concrete slab behind me grew colder. I forced myself to ignore it and focused on planning my next steps. Judging by the situation, the enemy had bigger problems right now. Sure, after what I'd done, I was probably on their most wanted list. But did they even have the resources to deal with that list? Constellation had pummeled the sector hard before going down. Most military and police sites likely got hit. And the locals probably had more urgent concerns, like whoever was going to show up in the sky to replace the fallen destroyer. The possibility that there wasn't anyone left in the sky, I refused to entertain that. Minutes turned to hours. No one came looking for me. Not ours, not theirs. No one gave a damn about the rat hiding in a construction site. Eventually, I got tired of waiting and dozed off into a light, anxious sleep. Cold woke me, sinking into my bones. And something else, something wrong that made the hairs on my arms stand up and my breath catch. I lay motionless, barely breathing for several minutes, analyzing the environment, listening to the silence. I'd slept well, it was fully night now, and my hiding spot was pitch black. And something in that blackness had woken me. More minutes passed. I kept listening. Maybe it was just my nerves. My instincts, false this time. Half an hour later, footsteps. And a voice, quiet, accented, unnatural to my ears. All clear. Another voice, right above me, replied in the same clumsy accent. No incidents. Just a few dogs and a couple of canters running around. There was a pause. Then the first voice, annoyed, slippery bastard, took out a whole squad and vanished. If not for the chaos, the guy above me stayed silent. Stay alert. If he shows up, shoot on sight. Silence again. I listened to the footsteps receding, mentally thanking the training program that had taught me to sleep in absolute silence. Fine. I'd wait. Wait I did. Until dawn, footsteps again. More of that grating speech. Same as before? Nothing new. No change. And the thermals still show nothing. Bastard's probably hiding under a pile of rocks or something. Good luck finding him. A boot struck the concrete, dislodging a small pebble that fell on my head. Well, command says he's not a priority now. If the locals see him again, we'll deal with him. But for now, pack it up. They say those passives are getting ready for a landing. After some rustling, the voices left me alone. At last, I could move and finally relieve my bladder. Not exactly heroic, but that's life. Once the pressure was gone, I froze again, listening. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Even closer, some unknown creature. Maybe one of those canters they mentioned, scraped and whistled. Slowly, my body slipped into a kind of half-hibernation. Thoughts faded. I stayed still, barely conscious, tracking the world only from the corner of my mind. So the whole day passed. Long, dreary, and agonizing. I wanted to stretch my muscles, to eat, to drink. But sticking my head out before dark was an unjustifiable risk. Of course, at night, you could still be spotted by an observer with night vision gear, but there were fewer eyes out then. And finally, the long-awaited moment came. I began carefully crawling out of my hiding spot. First, I stuck my head out and looked around cautiously. Silence and calm surrounded me. The local sun had already set below the horizon, casting a blanket of darkness over the land, but thousands of stars lazily twinkling above outlined the terrain fairly well. I stayed motionless for a couple of minutes, but saw nothing unusual. Far away, tiny lights glowed, probably windows of residential houses. But in front of me stretched the same lifeless industrial zone. I shivered involuntarily. The emptiness and silence of this place unexpectedly got to my nerves. UGH.to ease my conscience. I pulled out my rifle and started scanning the surroundings through the night scope. Still empty. Only two dogs were lazily wandering somewhere in the distance, their bright red outlines standing out on the gray-green picture. Time to get out. I muttered under my breath and began freeing myself from the concrete trap. Once back to normal, upright human form, I froze again, cautiously observing the surroundings through the scope. No one and nothing. I risked stepping out from behind the concrete pile to check the opposite sector. That side looked livelier. Silhouettes of high-rise buildings appeared, decorated with a mosaic of burning windows. With the scope's sensitivity pushed to the limit, I even saw people walking. My stomach betrayed me with a growl, and I stopped looking and started running toward the city blocks. Further, further. But then paranoia hit full force again. With each step, the fear grew stronger. It felt as if snipers were watching my moving figure in real life, coldly waiting for me to come within a kill zone. The feeling was so real that, at one point, I simply couldn't force myself out from behind the corner of another building. My hair stood on end, cold sweat ran down my spine, and my legs refused to move forward. To hell with it, I muttered, sitting down in the corner between a wall and a staircase. If intuition screams danger so loudly, you have to listen. The worst part was that going back scared me too. Any sniper seeing a retreating target in such a situation would try their luck. I certainly would. Sitting still was also a bad option. If we assumed the snipers had spotted me, by morning there would be regular soldiers here, and I definitely wouldn't be able to take them all out. Crap. The only choice left was to somehow get inside the building I was leaning against and hope all my fears were just the product of a sick imagination. Moving carefully along the wall, I found a broken window to a semi-basement floor. Muttering quietly, I crawled inside, ending up in a damp, musty room filled with crates of unknown metal parts. Luckily, the door from that room was open. Exploring the building gave a discouraging result: an ordinary repair hangar. Few rooms, but a lot of equipment scattered inside the largest hall, and many windows through which anyone could spot me. But I had no choice anymore. So, hunched over like a dying man, I carefully weaved through the hangar, creating false tracks, then climbed into the wide bucket of one of the excavators, covered myself with a huge piece of dirty canvas, and hid again. This time, I also had to watch my stomach. Just the smell of the petroleum mixture soaking the canvas made me feel nauseous. Again, waiting, flavored with anxious half-sleep, half-dream. But this time I did wait. When, by my feeling, dawn had just barely come, the hangar doors suddenly flew open, blown off by an explosive charge. Awakened by the blast, I almost jumped up, but managed to hold myself. Outside my canvas cover, chaos reigned. Gunshots, screams, conflicting orders, and swearing. It seemed like a fight to the death was happening. However, the shots quickly stopped, but the swearing grew louder. And worst of all, I heard dogs barking. The barking moved back and forth, once very close, forcing me to grip my pistol tightly. But it was fine. The shaggy creature, confused by the terrible smell of the cloth hiding me, didn't sense a thing. Orders resumed, mixed with curses. Someone approached my excavator. "Well, where are we supposed to look here?" Came a muffled voice with the same awful accent. "Zobasti, Toothy. Didn't find him, so we're supposed to?" "Orders are orders." A second, thick-accented voice responded seriously. "Check the canvas in the bucket." I went cold, but the first voice refused indignantly. "You check it if you want. Did you see what he's covered in? I still gotta get home." "Well, just shoot a couple of bullets there," the second offered, freezing me again. "Clemens will kill me. He almost got hit by a ricochet just now. He's nervous." The voices slowly moved away, and I relaxed a little. A couple of minutes later, the ground began to tremble lightly, the vibration reaching me in the bucket. Astonished shouts followed. The bucket jolted harder, and I heard something heavy fall nearby. The astonishment in the voices turned to outright horror. "Run. Everyone out." What the hell was going on? I carefully lifted the edge of the canvas, peeking over the metal rim, and managed to see enemy soldiers running out of the hangar. Then, just behind them, a beam fell from the ceiling, raising a cloud of dust. The excavator shook so hard I nearly flew out of the bucket. The trembling earth was joined by a heavy bass rumble, growing louder and louder. Then a voice boomed from the sky. "Lieutenant Christopher Alt, a rescue operation is underway. Remain in place until the evacuation team arrives." I almost shouted with joy. Damn, they haven't forgotten me. And I'd be home soon. Nearby, something exploded. The fragile building, unable to withstand it, began to collapse. Before my eyes, part of the roof fell down. Then another blast, roaring very close, tore away the remains and carried them off. A wave of scorching air hit me. Part of a wall flew past me, tumbling nearby. Then my trusty excavator tipped over like a toy truck. I was thrown from the bucket and, expecting death any second, curled into a fetal position, covering my head with my hands that I was spared. No debris fell on me. Only dust dusted me lightly. And right next to my ear, the voice rang out again. "Lieutenant Alt, your location has been registered. Evacuation team will arrive in 40 seconds. I got up on all fours, found my rifle and pistol by sight, grabbed them, and only then allowed myself to look around. Around me were only ruins, wrapped in clouds of dust of varying opacity. And further, toward the city, a few hundred meters. Above the planet's surface, ignoring all flight laws, a cruiser of the dictatorship drifted lazily. It moved, leaving a real swath of destroyed buildings scorched by the thrust of its engines. It launched a huge number of rockets and shells every second, spitting laser and plasma bursts, gravitational pulses, and milligrams of antimatter. Around it, houses and overpasses collapsed. Whirlwinds of smoke and fire rose to the sky. Behind it, only leveled city blocks of a foreign town remained. I just stood there, mouth agape, staring after the demon of destruction descending from the heavens, when a landing bot plopped down beside me. The stormtroopers, noticing my not-so-adequate appearance, made no fuss, grabbed me under the arms, and practically carried me inside the vehicle. It immediately took off upwards, away from the hostile land. "Lieutenant, are you all right? Do you need immediate medical attention?" A sergeant. Medic leaned over me. "No, I'm fine. Thanks, Sergeant. Just hungry." My remark triggered light laughter. Someone handed me a snack bar, another a flask of water. The sergeant studied me inquisitively for a while, then calmed down and sat down in his seat. A few minutes later, we caught up with the cruiser and entered one of its docking decks. The fleet's scorched earth operation on the planet dragged on for nearly another month. It seemed the unexpected surface attack, which cost the fleet 8 destroyers and a cruiser at once, had really enraged our command, and the rank and file as well. Accustomed to interplanetary flights, the colossal ships burned through fuel at unimaginable rates, but stubbornly crawled above the surface, leaving behind scorched wastelands. Landing craft darted along the flight paths, wiping off whatever survived outside the blast zones. And high above the clouds, the hulks of battleships moved leisurely, occasionally sending fiery greetings down below. The civilian population wasn't deliberately targeted, but nobody bothered to spare them either. Cities were ground to dust. In the name of eliminating entrenched military forces, and the fact that ordinary people got caught in the crossfire was of no concern to anyone. Cruel, but effective, the second or third day of the purge saw civilians fleeing en masse into the wilderness, trying to stay as far away from anything military as possible. They were left alone. I no longer took part in the fighting, only kept watch from the guest cabin on the cruiser. Occasionally, I managed to talk with Adele, who had been rescued from the planet by another ship and was now languishing in a similar cabin on the opposite side of the globe. But all things come to an end. 24 days after my rescue, the planetary cleansing operation was called off. One by one, ships rose upward, settling into geostationary orbits and stopping the consumption of precious fuel. Down below came the colonists, stormtroopers, and infantry sent to occupy territory and establish initial fortifications. It was time to review the mission and draw conclusions. There was nothing particularly pompous or soul-stirring about it. Too many soldiers and officers had participated in the operation, so I only got a few minutes with a major, worn down by life, buried beneath folders and boxes of awards. The major, skimming through my records, handed me new service badges proudly marked 48 and 232. Then, with a ceremonious, weary sigh, presented me with a new medal for courage, 3rd class. Then, after some rummaging, he pulled out another box. "Lieutenant, your actions during the evacuation from the constellation have been recognized as heroic," he said with some flair, his eyes scanning the desk as if searching for something. To accompany the box, you have been awarded another military decoration, the 5th class medal for self-sacrifice. Be proud. Very few can boast of wearing it while still in good health. I feigned pride while remembering all my self-serving calculations about saving a neighbor on the doomed destroyer. Turns out, those calculations had been accurate. In addition, by order of Fleet Admiral William Rodriguez, you are promoted to Senior Lieutenant. Congratulations. I snapped to attention, saluted the major, and headed out. Waiting for the next twists of fate, the wait lasted nearly a week. During that time, I suffered from boredom, cleaning and maintaining my weapons, watching films, reading. But thankfully, that ended too. I was honored by a summons to the local personnel officer. "Come in, Senior Lieutenant," grunted a major, nose buried in a display. "Have a seat." I sat down and silently waited while he read and marked notes for several minutes. Finally, he looked up. "So, Senior Lieutenant, a request has come through. You will now serve aboard the battleship Dictator as an information security officer in the 4th landing sector. The shuttle to the battleship leaves tonight. You can take it. Any questions?" My mind spun with thoughts, mostly about Adele. I hoped she was being sent to the same battleship, Sir Major might. I asked, "Will anyone from the Constellation crew be on the battleship besides me?" The Major chuckled and fiddled with the display. "There are a couple of infantrymen, Privates John Abrams and M. Oh dear. Masturbator Bidoef. What a name. No one else." I saluted and went off to prepare for the flight. A hollow emptiness filled my heart. Serving on different ships was practically a sentence for relationships. Rare leaves, trying to synchronize schedules. Then a merciless fleet order, and the ships would scatter billions of kilometers apart, perhaps never to be near each other again in orbit around the same planet. Relationships? Forget it. Adele, whom I contacted from the cabin, looked equally sad despite putting on a brave face. She was being sent to the medical department on one of the destroyers in the group around the battleship Retribution that we spoke words of love, both mindful of the harsh truth. There was barely room for one battleship in orbit around a planet. Not two. And, in the end, the only real chance we had of staying near each other was if someone else remained patrolling the local life, and both our battleships returned home, to the Corona system. No miracle happened. Miracles, in general, happen very rarely, and usually not to you. I had learned this truth a long time ago. Adele left the system 4 months after our rescue from the planet. And we didn't even manage a proper goodbye, just a few minutes of empty, meaningless conversation, interrupted by interference caused by solar wind. What do you say to the person you love, whom you will most likely never see again? I didn't know. During those 4 months, we submitted several transfer requests, but the problem of distance loomed large. By that time, my battleship had already taken its fixed position as an artificial satellite around the Prometheus 3. We had captured, while hers was on a research mission at the edge of the system. Probably, if we had been smarter and filed our reports immediately, they would have accommodated us without problems. But instead, we only received the standard reply: denied due to technical impossibility. Simply put, the fleet wasn't going to send transports hundreds of millions of kilometers just for a couple of young officers. Then came the logical conclusion of the story. For out of 6 battleships with their groups returned to the Corona system, the ships of our squadron remained in orbit around Prometheus 3, and the 6th battleship was doomed to linger for who knows how long near the 4th planet, coordinating relations with the Federation. Yes, with it, the Federation, its representative appeared in the system almost immediately after our victory. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it all looked pretty unsightly, as if the Federation was vigorously raking in the heat with other people's hands. The politics of the Colossus remain unchanged for a very long time, and that policy is intense, aimed at internal development and increasing potential. The Federation couldn't care less about what happens beyond its borders. It couldn't care less about the breakaway colonies fighting each other for a place under the sun. The main thing is that no one should trespass into its sector of space. That is the outer shell, a beautiful signboard hiding an eternally hungry and greedy predator for resources. With modern mining technologies, any planet can be drained within a few decades, and that would be just a drop in the ocean of needs. The Federation is building and developing at a fantastic pace. Planetary shells are created, colossi capable of transporting entire populations come off the slipways, and there were even rumors about artificial planets being created in the sector. Center, with perfect gravity, optimal distance from the star, excellent atmospheric composition, and so on. The Federation is experiencing a golden age. It desperately needs resources, best mined beyond its own territory. And it does so by signing contracts for mining with various colonies, many of which long regret having chosen freedom and independence. But there is a problem. Not everyone is willing to give away their only wealth for next to nothing, and no one wants to pay full price. And apparently, a solution was found. Not the most complicated, but rather elegant. Support the young, ambitious government. Help with technology and resources, set it against neighbors. And then get those lucrative contracts. We're happy because we're increasing our power and influence while getting money and technology. The Federation is happy because it ships out outdated equipment and technology in exchange for access to the resources of entire star systems. Only the systems themselves, like Prometheus, are not very happy about it. But no one else really cares. Now, almost 2 years after the system was captured, the orbit of the fourth planet is crowded with Federation forces. On the surface, the first complexes are already deployed and resource development is in full swing. Here on Prometheus 3, noticeable changes have also taken place. The Federation did not skimp and issued a huge set of colonial equipment by our standards. Now, continuous construction and simultaneous terraforming are underway. A new capital city has already been built, Cloud's Edge. I don't know who came up with the name, but it fits well. The city is located at an altitude of 1.5 kilometers above ocean level. Around it, ski resorts, hot springs, geysers, and a high-speed road down to the coast, where there is already a seaside recreational zone. One would think it's impossible to do this in just a year. A city designed for a couple of million people, infrastructure. But this is just a typical project embedded in Federation technology. You press a button, specify where to get the resources, and that's it. A year later, you get a future. Capital.by the way, like everyone remaining in the system, I was given an apartment in Cloud's Edge. Also a typical one, but very comfortable and spacious. I suspect the dictatorship plans to make us the first wave of settlers. I probably wouldn't mind. The place is really nice. But sitting here alone, without Adele, is absolutely not an option. Over time, my mind had somewhat come to terms with the separation, but a deep melancholy still firmly settled in my soul. Most likely, it was thanks to this melancholy that I threw myself headlong into work and study again. Perhaps Adele was some kind of restraining factor for me, forcing me to push the past to the background. Quiet, almost familial happiness allowed me to forget about the project, studies, and deceased parents. Now more and more often, a melodious chime echoed in my head. I recalled more frequently the slyly smirking sergeant and the tired Dr. Zoll that I tried to find solace in my usual activities. I shot my beloved rifle to exhaustion and sparred with the Marines. I spent evenings studying advanced courses for officer qualification. And I even managed to perform my regular duties. What's most interesting, this time I wasn't even thinking about promotion or career advancement. I was just saving myself from missing Adele and the persistent chime of bells. But the army, in a dictatorship, rewards effort even when you don't want it to be. By the end of the second year of service in Prometheus 3's orbit, I was summoned to an audience with Rear Admiral Boris Vazovsky, commander of the battleship, and our entire group. The old man received me with as much informality as possible, but I still felt a bit uneasy. The charisma and inner grandeur of the gray-haired veteran impressed and made me stand at attention. "Sit down, Senior Lieutenant." The Admiral smiled from behind his desk. "This is not a debriefing or an honor guard." I carefully sat in the chair, remembering that the biggest mistake in such a situation would be to confuse informality with familiarity toward the commander. "I've received some reports about you. Interesting ones." He dreamily rolled his eyes. "So interesting that I didn't bother to dig up your entire dossier." And there he goes. I felt a little uncomfortable. God knows what the old man saw in my file. "So, kid, I'm sorry about what happened with your girl," the Admiral said unexpectedly. That I stared at him in surprise. "Excuse me?" "Judging by the statistical data, the breakup with her affected you very much. It shows in the reports. So I sympathize with you. But the same reports clearly indicate that you didn't go off the rails, didn't drown your grief in beer, but acted most wisely and rationally. You took up self-improvement." "Yes, sir, Rear Admiral." And thank you for your words about Adele. It really was not easy for me. The old man snorted approvingly. Family is important, very important, he said suddenly, with some sadness, then fell silent for a while, lost in his own thoughts. But I called you here for another reason. I put on my most attentive expression. You, Chris, are almost a unique phenomenon in our fleet. The admiral started from afar. You started as a victim of repression, then went through prison, served in infantry, proved yourself well in the Marines, and then fairly well as a fleet officer. You've seen our armed forces from all sides. You're striving for something more, but it seems your main sympathies are with the Marines, judging by how much time you spend with them. Am I right? Perhaps, Rear Admiral. Perhaps I lack the upbringing to become fully one of the officers. But with the Marines, it's simple. Well, someone's lacking manners, the old man chuckled. Manners are crap. What matters is whether you've got brains. And from what I see, you've got a decent head on your shoulders. Thank you, Vice Admiral, sir. No need to thank me. Now, according to my aide, and I've no reason to doubt him, you could apply for a captain's rank right now. So what do you say, son? Want to be a captain? I do, I said, shrugging uncertainly as I weighed my options. What do I have to do for that? Practically nothing. Just say yes. The Admiral grinned again. There's an interesting position on the battleship that's currently filled by someone not quite suitable. He's miserable. The job suffers. No one wins. So starting today, I'll move him back to the infantry and appoint you in his place. I hesitated. If someone's being demoted to make room for me, that might leave them bitter, and I didn't need enemies like that. Don't worry. He's already filed 2 requests to be relieved from the post. The old man read my silence perfectly. He'll probably thank you. Permission to ask. What's the position? Ground Force Coordinator for this ship. Think you can handle it? Things just kept getting more interesting. No, the coordinator wasn't a combat role. It was purely administrative. Orders would still come directly from above. But all the routine requests from the infantry went through the coordinator. His job was to voice the unit's needs to fleet command and explain to the infantry why those needs weren't being met, or vice versa. The boundaries were fuzzy. In practice, he was a go-between for fleet and ground units, and everyone came to him with everything. I groaned internally, imagining the mess ahead. Still, turning it down wasn't an option. It was a respectable post, usually holding the rank of major. Refusing wouldn't sit well with the admiral, which meant goodbye to any future promotions. I'll do my best, Vice Admiral, sir. Right answer, Captain, he nodded. Stop by my secretary, Hill. Give you your orders. And don't stress too much, it's peacetime. Shouldn't be too rough. By the time I left his office, I was officially logged into the system as a captain. Next stop, logistics. Get the new uniform, return it, buy something that actually fits. Nothing ever changes. At least I didn't have to buy new weapons this time. The next morning, dressed in a sharp new captain's uniform, I headed to my new post. My office was located in the administrative sector of the infantry deck, and surprise, there was even a guard posted at the door who snapped to attention the moment I approached. Incredible. I was starting to like this. I nodded to the guard, scanned the lock with my ID, and the door slid open. Turned out, it wasn't my office proper, but a reception area. Sitting at a desk was a pretty young woman in a sergeant's uniform. The moment she saw me, she jumped up and stood at attention. Her uniform shirt tightened in a way that naturally drew my gaze to him. Yes, Captain, sir. Permission to introduce myself. Sergeant Liza Riley, Infantry Division. Acting as your personal secretary. At ease, Sergeant. I'd gotten used to the rank and file showing me some deference, but today, for some reason, it felt awkward. No need to be so formal. I'm basically just another grunt. Yes, Captain. I saw you get your, let's say, face readjusted unofficially during sparring last week. So, permission to continue with unofficial communication. She was teasing me, but in a friendly way, and that was good. She hadn't gone to the academy, but I had, and one of our courses was all about interpersonal psychology with subordinates. This was a classic approach, risky, but effective. It set the tone right away. Let's keep it unofficial, but not that unofficial. I smiled and moved toward the office door. I'll need a summary of current affairs. I should probably start digging into the mess that just landed on my head. Already done, Captain, she said, now all business. I took the liberty of optimizing your terminal interface. You'll find separate panels for direct comms, active coordinator tasks, and a list of classified files I don't have access to, but I assume you should look at them. Thanks, I said sincerely, and stepped into my new office. IT was spacious and neat, but without extravagance. A desk, a modest chair behind it, a few others along the wall. A massive display screen was mounted in front. In another corner, a long leather couch, some comfy armchairs, a cabinet, and a coffee table. Work zone and rest zone. Not bad, I liked it. My gaze lingered on the couch, and I briefly entertained the thought of what might be done on it. With Sergeant Riley, I gave myself a mental slap, thought of Adele, and sat at the desk. The day flew by. I got acquainted with operations, studied the system, reviewed current issues. I even put my admin knowledge to work, checking the terminal and comms for bugs, malware, or surveillance. Cleaned up by the end of the day, I even did something useful. Got a group of infantrymen with shore leave onto a free shuttle. It took a little arguing with some pompous airfield clerk insisting they could fly out at noon instead of in the morning, but I managed. There were enough of them to justify a dedicated transport, and I made it happen. The sergeant made me coffee a couple times and even brought lunch while I was buried in the personnel offense records. Having subordinates was not bad. Having subordinates, I glanced again at the couch. Damn it, I was turning into some teenage cadet with a crush. After work, I stretched out on that very couch and almost dozed off. Then I locked the office, nodded to the ever-alert guard, and headed deep into the infantry sector. There was always something interesting to do there. To my surprise, a whole bunch of familiar and semi-familiar faces in uniform rushed to congratulate me on my promotion. It felt unexpectedly nice. The reason became obvious pretty quickly. While I'd been holed up in the office, my sergeant had apparently told everyone about me. And by day's end, word had spread that I'd arranged a dedicated early transport for the shore leavers. Suddenly, I wasn't just a face on the deck. I was one of the guys. And if you weren't on duty, you had to have a beer with me. Drifting through the crowd of well-wishers, I found myself in the local bar, where more glasses were raised in my honor, toasting my victory over fleet bureaucrats. I had no choice but to return the favor, buying a round for everyone. And then, as always, things snowballed. Laughter, music, more beer, a brief visit from military police with disapproving stares, more laughter. I've always been amazed by infantry rules. If a stormtrooper's stuck on a ship, he's considered half on leave. Training, drills, and watch duty? Mandatory. But if you're not doing any of that, nobody minds if you down a couple beers. The whole system exists to let off steam for soldiers cooped up far from home. And it works. Depression, suicide, and serious crime are incredibly rare. The evening blurred on. At some point, Sergeant Riley showed up again, clinked glasses with me, and dragged me to the dance floor. I think that's when I officially lost the ability to think straight. Either that, or the alcohol nuked my memory. One minute I'm staggering through a dance, hands all over that tight, lithe body. The next I'm in my cabin, and that same body, very much topless, is riding me, moaning with pleasure. That's where the memory ends. In the morning, I woke up to find the sergeant had tactfully slipped away. The memory of our night filled me with a mix of satisfaction and shame. I was going to have to tell her I already had a girlfriend. I trudged toward my office like I was on my way to the gallows, rehearsing explanations and slowing my pace. But, as usual, none of that was necessary. Sergeant Riley, disgustingly chipper and cheerful, jumped up from her desk when I walked in. "Good morning, Captain. You're not half bad in bed, you know." So much for rehearsing my speech. I could feel myself blushing. What a minx I've got for a subordinate. "Good morning to you too, Sergeant," I mumbled, trying to find the right moment to bring up Adele. "Listen." "Stop," Stop, stop. Captain, please don't give me that guilty puppy look and start telling me about the love of your life and how faithful you are. I already know. And don't worry, I'm not trying to marry you tomorrow. So let's skip the melodrama, shall we? I had a feeling we'd work well together. I liked her, and it seemed the feeling was mutual. So why complicate things, right? That's how it was. Saying a weight had been lifted off my shoulders would be an understatement. My conscience still nagged at me now and then, reminding me I was an unprincipled, faithless bastard. But even so, I felt better. Much better. Sergeant, has anyone ever told you you're every man's dream come true? I asked as I made my way to my door. No, sir, Captain, she snapped back, though the tips of her ears turned noticeably pink. Behave yourself, Sergeant, and one day you might just hear it from me, I said in mock grandiosity before quickly ducking into my office. Something was definitely hurled at me as I shut the door, judging by the sound it made on impact. Work gradually fell into rhythm. I untangled the convoluted web of interdepartmental relations on the ship and carved out a solid niche for myself. The Marines, more than happy to offload all dealings with the Navy onto me, practically carried me around on a pedestal, for I always sided with them and often managed to wrangle extra perks from command. Every now and then, squad commanders would drop by for a drink and a gripe about life. At first, they tried visiting during working hours, but I eventually nudged their visits into the evenings. The most frequent guest was Captain Frank Kanzler, who'd had my office before me. At first, I worried he might be feeling nostalgic, but it turned out to be the opposite. He loathed the coordinator's job with every fiber of his being and sincerely sympathized with me, offering advice whenever he could. I actually picked up a lot of useful tips from him. And, as it turned out, he had once tried to make a move on Sergeant Riley and failed miserably. She's a real piece of work, buddy, he told me gravely, casting a wary glance at the door. Word is, you managed to win her over. Props for that. But tread carefully. She can mess up your life so bad you'll be howling at the moon. And good luck trying to fire her. Nobody knows the job better than she does. He gave a gloomy look at his glass of amber liquid. I couldn't help wondering, was Riley the real reason he hated this post so much? Sure seemed like it days for Riley and me. Things between us continued. On the surface, our relationship was simple and straightforward, but layered with teasing and nerve-wracking games. She seemed entirely unbothered by any of it, taking clear pleasure in both the bedroom and out of it, constantly pushing my buttons with subtle hints and suggestive remarks, always with complete professionalism and dead seriousness that I suspect that if we didn't end up regularly on my couch or in my bed, I'd have ended up just like Kanzler. As it was, I was willing to tolerate it, especially since a satisfied Riley would make coffee, bring me lunch, and help out with work in every possible way. Hell, maybe she was that mythical perfect woman after all. That's when I thought of Adele again and felt like a bastard all over again. What would I do if our ship suddenly got transferred to the Crown system? What then? But the ship wasn't reassigned. Instead, one fine day, a global information announcement blared across the vessel. Attention! State priority notification. Attention! Are we at war again? Riley asked, handing me another cup of coffee. I don't know. Attention! Global announcement, dated the 17th of May, year 206, system. Time of the Crown. In accordance with the norms and statutes adopted across human-settled space, the Crown 3 dictatorship is being reformed into an imperial-type government, the Crown Empire. An acceptable secondary name is the Empire of the Crown. The state will encompass the Crown and Prometheus systems in their entirety, including all known planetary bodies. Government will be led by a hereditary emperor and an elected advisory body, the Imperial Senate. The capital of the empire is declared to be Crown's Pearl. The emperor's residence in the Prometheus system is established in the city of Cloud's Reach. You may find the full list of nomenclature changes in the message sent to your inbox. Well, would you look at that? Riley said skeptically. And what does it mean, practically speaking? Nothing dramatic, really. I scratched my head. For this backwater part of space, it just means they'll renovate Cloud's Reach, add some luxury, and build a palace. Overall, our beloved dictator is just legally cementing the hereditary nature of his rule. His son's already grown. He needs to hand over power smoothly and without incident. Oh, so that's it. I hadn't really noticed. Yeah, makes sense. Now power can't be taken away from the family without a full-blown coup. And who wants that? The military's happy. Most folks are too. So, for now, everything stays calm. And 100 years from now, if things go to hell, the system will be so entrenched that any rebellion will be way harder to pull off. Riley gave a solemn nod and left, while I remained alone with my thoughts. Once again, a question surfaced. In my mind, what the hell was I even doing here, while my enemy was out there founding empires and conquering star systems? On the personal front, complete chaos. I either needed to quit and go find Adele, or start taking things seriously with Lisa. But wasn't I supposed to be on some grand mission? Some great goal? To hell with it. I couldn't do a damn thing. Stuck in this backwater, and all this crap was ruining any semblance of a normal life. I was just existing for the sake of existing. And this year marked exactly 20 years since a curtain of fire had fallen on my planet, on my city, on my family, that I closed my eyes, feeling them well up. In my head, I heard a soft, solemn chime, like silver bells ringing. 20 years. School, prison, service, more school, more service, all for the sake of revenge. But do I still want that? Adele's smiling face appeared in my mind, only to be replaced by Riley's stern frown. Everything good I'd ever had in life was tied to some form of family or connection. So why was I still walking the path of a lone suicide agent, instead of living my own damn life? The chime of bells took on an angry tone. Sergeant Riley's face flashed again, shaking her head in disapproval, followed by Dr. Zoll arguing something passionately, and then my first ever handler, the one who vanished during Phase 2 of the project and was never seen again. But their voices no longer felt right. Their arguments were shrouded in fog, outdated by time. Was I wrong to still be chasing shadows? Would I ever achieve anything? Or would I just keep drifting around alien orbits until, a few decades from now, I got a quiet retirement and moved planetside to grow old and die in solitude? I felt sick inside. Today, it seemed, I'd gotten my first real taste of a midlife crisis, and no matter how hard Liza and I tried to keep our relationship at the level of casual, carefree companionship, time had begun to make its own adjustments. We were spending more and more time together, and now and then a serious note would creep into our conversations. The image of Adele in my mind had gradually transformed into something fantastically distant and unreal. I received a few messages from her and sent some back in return. She had been promoted and was now the head of medical services aboard her destroyer. I, in violation of all seniority regulations, had been awarded the rank of major ahead of schedule, finally matching the administrative post I'd held for some time. Both our careers were going smoothly. Well, how else could they go, considering the Empire wasn't planning any new wars at the moment? By unspoken mutual agreement, we avoided the topic of personal relationships. For years was a long time. Maybe she was still waiting for me. Maybe. But I was afraid to ask. It seemed she was too. Liza, with a tact that was unusual for her, never touched that part of my life, and for that I was deeply grateful. Meanwhile, our star system was beginning to stir with an unhealthy kind of excitement. A visit was expected, not just from anyone, but from the Emperor's own son. The planet's infrastructure had been nicely restored by then. The remaining local population had come to fully understand the role allotted to them and ceased resisting. It was time to consolidate the situation with an official visit from a member of the imperial bloodline that I don't know what truly motivated the Emperor to send his son, but the official reason was to ratify the appointment of the planetary governor. Interestingly, the new governor was chosen from among the former local elite and had all the necessary qualities: cowardice and a love of the good life. His cowardice, reinforced by a battleship looming in orbit, guaranteed absolute loyalty to the Empire. and his desire to live well gave hope that he'd do his job properly so as not to lose his place in the palace. Naturally, in time, his old friends and acquaintances would gather around and form another greedy, dim-witted government. But what did that have to do with me? Ahead of the high-ranking visit, I was summoned once again by the Vice Admiral. Major Alt, reporting as ordered. Take a seat, Major. The old man waved me over. He'd aged noticeably over the past couple of years, but still exuded authority and confidence. Not that his aura had much effect on me anymore. We'd had plenty of dealings in the course of duty by now. For a while, the Admiral studied me thoughtfully, tapping his fingers on the table, lost in his thoughts. I've heard, Major, you haven't given up your training with the Marines. Correct, sir, still keeping it up. That much was true. My training continued, though my studies and self-improvement, the things he used to praise me for, had fallen by the wayside, crushed under the weight of constant work. Good. Another thoughtful silence. It looked like the old man wanted to burden me with yet another task, but wasn't sure whether he should. I wondered what exactly he had in mind. All right, he finally decided. You're aware that the Emperor's son is coming to visit. And that, son, is a massive headache for me. They're landing in 2 weeks, and it falls to me to ensure their complete safety, something I'm no expert in. And frankly, I don't like it. He paused for a moment, as if expecting a comment. I offered none. The problem is that half our people are trained for flight operations, and the other half are basic infantry. The only perfect candidate to lead the security for this event is you. You've shown yourself to be a capable organizer over the past few years, and you get along with the Marines. Any objections? I wasn't too surprised. I had half expected something like this. What I hadn't expected was for the Admiral to dump the entire operation on my shoulders. No objections, sir. Good. You've got 2 weeks and full access to all our resources. The job is not just to make everything secure, but also. The old man twirled his hand in the air, searching for the word. Impressive. We want this princeling to feel honored and celebrated. Understood. Yes, sir. In that case, I'm granting you emergency status and temporarily relieving you of your duties as Marine Coordinator. Take a shuttle down, assess the situation. I expect a report and a complete action plan in 3 days. Emergency status. Now that was magic. I got the distinct impression that this entire colossal ship now existed for the sole purpose of fulfilling my every whim. Doors slid open before I was even close. The normally grumpy technicians practically raced to offer me transport to the surface. To get my shuttle off the battleship, they delayed fueling someone else's craft. Once planetside, I was granted clear airspace above the spaceport and provided with a top-of-the-line flyer and full escort. I felt a pang of envy for the Admiral. He had that kind of status all the time, not just on special assignments. My craft, escorted by police skimmers, sped across the city and landed without the slightest formality right on the palace's main docking platform. The escorts remained hovering overhead. Honored Emergency Commissioner, welcome to the palace. As soon as I stepped out of the flyer, a man dressed in the height of local fashion approached me. My name is Walter Stotz, and I serve as the palace administrator. I am at your full disposal. To my surprise, Walter turned out to be a rather competent official. We spent 2 full days examining palace models and planning the logistics of my assignment. At one point, the future governor himself dropped by, but he got bored with the blueprints quickly and vanished. By the end of the 2nd day, I had a solid understanding of how to secure the palace grounds. What remained was organizing the space beyond its walls. Thankfully, whoever chose the site for the imperial residence had exercised some common sense. The complex was set slightly apart from the city, with no other buildings nearby. I spent the remaining time going through Marine personnel files. I needed to form both ceremonial and fully combat-ready units. Finally, with every detail of the operation stitched together, I reported back to the Admiral. Well, Major, to start, I've decided to separate the ceremonial and actual defense elements. This will require a larger number of personnel, but allows for better flexibility in task assignments. Understood. First, the ceremonial part. We'll have an honor guard to greet the prince at the landing site and accompany him throughout the official proceedings. 12 men should suffice. All they need to do is stand at attention and march properly. I've attached a list of candidates. They'll need new dress uniforms in case their current ones are worn out. Weapons will be unloaded, of course. Good. Next, to add a sense of scale to the event, I suggest stationing 2 Marine squads on the palace grounds. Same protocol, dress uniforms, unloaded weapons. No need for new outfits here. They'll manage with what they have. The admiral nodded, silently. In addition, I've selected 23 points throughout the palace where sentries with rifles will make an effective visual impact. And lastly, the finishing touch, we'll need one of the destroyers. Come again. A destroyer. Sir. Hovering in the atmosphere at an altitude of 1 kilometer. It'll make quite the impression, Vice Admiral. Oh, youth, such dreamers. Fine, we'll lock out its weapons systems and let it hover. What's next? As for actual security, that destroyer will come in handy again. Its scanning systems can monitor all approaches to the palace. Smart thinking. Good job, son. And the command center should be located on the ship. If you permit, I could stay aboard, and, no, we'll assign our tactical coordinator there. The admiral cut me off. You'll stay on the ground, in the palace. After all, you're our chief of security now, aren't you? Yes, sir. The planning and fine-tuning took quite a while. Unfortunately, neither the general nor I had any real experience in this kind of operation, and we probably made plenty of stupid mistakes. Worse still, everything was only calculated to cover the official ceremonies at the palace. Yet the prince was bound to want to explore the planet. All we could do was hope for the best and trust no one would dare harm him. The next week and a half blurred into a continuous whirlwind. I was approving, signing, choosing. I commuted to the planet and reported to the admiral. Even Lisa, grasping the gravity of the moment, dropped her usual jokes and tried to help however she could. We deployed an identification system and linked it with the sensors on the Glimmer, the destroyer selected for the ceremonial escort. We dressed and drilled the Marines assigned to the honor guard. Real snipers and perimeter teams were carefully selected. Civilians invited to the event, and reporters planning to broadcast it planet-wide, were all briefed and put in line. All that remained was to wait for the prince. And the damn prince arrived. He arrived ahead of his battleship, casually greeted us, and without stopping, dropped into the atmosphere on the ceremonial destroyer, just to take a look at the planet. As he put it took me a whole hour to catch up with the little bastard. Oh, the special envoy himself, he exclaimed cheerfully upon spotting the Glimmer. Fallen behind us, we'll be making a few more passes around the planet. You're in charge of my security here, right? Yes, Your Highness, I confirmed, seething internally. Using those ceremonial titles for some reason really pissed me off. Excellent. When's the ceremony? Tomorrow at noon, local time in Cloud's Reach, Your Highness. Why the hell was I aboard the Glimmer when he showed up instead of at the palace? Someone else could have taken the heat. Perfect, came the cheerful reply. Then this evening, we'll have a swim in the ocean. Where would you recommend for that, Mr. Envoy? The best developed beach is near Cloud's Reach, Your Highness. As for wild beaches, you can pick any along the same latitude. The seas here are calm and safe. Great. Just stick with me and don't bother me unless it's something serious. I've got the afternoon free, and I plan to enjoy it. And so, like a couple of idiots, we spent the rest of the day chasing him around the planet. Then we guarded him while he swam. To his credit, he turned out to be a fit guy, around 20 or 22. Can't remember exactly. Bit of a nut, but not a complete moron. After he'd had his fill of sea frolicking, he finally handed things over to me and let me lead the way to the palace. Both the admiral, constantly in contact with me, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The landing went fairly smoothly, aside from the fact that about 50 people spilled out of the shuttle instead of a small entourage. I felt like a complete idiot for assigning 10 Marines to manage a swarm of grasshoppers. Ignoring the honor guard, the guests scattered in all directions, admiring trees, fountains, and the palace architecture. Thankfully, four of the prince's personal bodyguards stayed close to him, and the ceremonial guard kept near as well. I stepped aside, trying in vain to take in the whole scene. The falling dusk wasn't helping. "Hey, Chris," came a voice behind me that I turned and said nothing, staring at the man who had spoken. Standing before me, smiling faintly, was a ghost from that distant, almost forgotten life. Still in a dapper suit, stylish haircut, and with a sleek briefcase, no doubt crammed with diplomatic electronics. "Jared, has it been 10 years already?" he said, not waiting for a reply. "Don't worry, I activated a distortion field. A diplomat's best friend. No one can hear us. Not on this planet." "More than 10, I finally said that my mind raced. What the hell was he doing here? Sentimental. Visit? Ridiculous. Come to expose me? But why? "Relax," he said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I couldn't help but notice how tired and sunken his eyes were. "Your cover is safe. Actually, I need your help." "What kind of help?" "You see, Chris," he said with a dark chuckle, "the higher you climb, the deeper they dig. And I've crossed a line I probably shouldn't have." I tried to discreetly scan the area. No one seemed to care about us. The prince was strolling through the park, surrounded by guards and fawning courtiers. My marines were focused on him. "So what happened?" I asked, still scanning the surroundings. "They exhumed the remains of some supposed ancestor of mine buried on Colony 3. Ran a DNA test. Routine procedure, really. Only, I failed it. There's only a 40% chance I'm related to the guy. Too low to ignore, too high to justify immediate execution. So now they're doing a second check. I'm probably under the kind of scrutiny you wouldn't believe." "How do you know?" "Novak told me," he said, stepping beside me. "We all have emergency channels to contact each other. You were the only one off-grid. He got a job in security and heard about it in time. I would have never figured it out myself. So what now?" I turned to face him. "What else is there, my friend?" He gave me a bitter smile. "I die." We stared at each other in silence for a while. "What's your plan?" I asked at last. If Jared knew before the jump, he'd had at least a month to plan something. And I knew he would have used it. "I had a plan," he shrugged. "Simple and crude. I'd just shoot that bastard during the ceremony tomorrow. Maybe yell something dramatic about revenge from the Crown Commonwealth. Or maybe I'd shoot myself right after. Either way, I wasn't planning on getting caught." "Solid plan," I muttered. It was, until I saw who was handling security here. "I'm not dragging. You down with me?" "So the plan's changed." "I'm listening," I said, turning my gaze back to the park. "I'll stage an attempt. Tomorrow, as planned. I'll act like I've got something to give the prince's guards. Get close. Take a weapon. Might have to kill one of them. Maybe one of your marines. Kill away. Doesn't matter to me. Just remember the ceremonial guards aren't armed. Only the prince's detail. Just checking. Maybe you'd grown attached. Anyway, I'll get to the bodyguards. Then I'll shoot at the prince. You, meanwhile, will be in the line of fire. I'll hit you in the chest, above the aorta, under the collarbone. You'll still have full use of your right arm. Then you'll shoot me. One clean shot, I hope. You were always a good marksman." "Don't worry, I still am." "And how do I explain all this?" "Simple. Tonight, some guy from the prince's retinue came up and asked you a bunch of questions about the ceremony. It made you suspicious, but not overly. Then during the event, you spotted him again, and his behavior raised more red flags. So you stayed alert. That's it." "Fine," I nodded. Simplicity is a terrifying force. For a while, we just stood in silence, staring into the encroaching twilight. "So, how's life treating you?" Jared suddenly asked. "Well, studies, career, war. Corpses up to my knees. Managed to have a relationship twice. Didn't think I'd be capable after all that crap in the project." "Yeah, no kidding. And you?" "Oh, compared to you, my life's been a fairy tale." He grinned, suddenly cheerful again. "Parties, girls, diplomatic corps. You won't believe it, but I even had a 6-month internship with the Federation. Admittedly, out on the fringe, but still. Relationships, though, haven't worked out. That's a shame. Yeah, it is. We stood in silence for another minute. Well, buddy, he said with unusual warmth. Glad to. See you again and talk. Until tomorrow, and goodbye. Goodbye, I said to his retreating figure, feeling a pang in my chest. The morning greeted me with a damp fog rolling down from the mountains and a pounding headache. I'd slept terribly, tormented by a string of incoherent nightmares. Rest had completely eluded me. 4 hours remained until the ceremony. I walked around the grounds, personally checking the posts and system readiness, barking at guards, checking press credentials. Everything was in order. An hour before the ceremony, the Rear Admiral arrived from orbit with a few staff officers and 4 assault escort troopers. The old man spotted me and gave a beckoning nod. Hello, son. Looks like everything's going smoothly here. What's the situation? Just finished a full inspection, Rear Admiral. No malfunctions. Everyone on site is cleared. We're ready for any contingencies, I replied, glancing toward the shimmering, barely visible in the lifting fog. Excellent work, Major, Vazovsky nodded. You might be a born administrator. The Admiral moved on, and I started thinking about how to get close to the prince during the ceremony. According to protocol, I had enough status to be present, but not quite enough to be standing in his immediate circle. Luckily, the Admiral solved that for me by inviting me to join the other officers in the honored guests section. I got a seat in the second row, not ideal, but close enough. Now keep in mind, everything's being recorded by a dozen cameras, and security will definitely review the footage. Time to start acting. Standing in formation with the rest of the military, awaiting the prince, I scanned the crowd with alert suspicion. Naturally, no one here posed a threat, except Jared. Still, I had to play the part. I glanced up at the guards on the walls, took a quick look toward the shimmering, found Jared among the guests and studied him for a while with calculated intensity. He didn't look at me. He was playing his own part, gazing solemnly at the platform where we stood on one side, and the local elite on the other. At noon, the Imperial anthem began to flow over the palace, slow and majestic. Everyone quieted and straightened. From behind us, my hand-picked honor guard marched forward with crisp precision. They stepped down from the platform and spread out in a semicircle. The crowd, sensing an unspoken invitation, moved in closer, but no one crossed the line. Everything remained peaceful. Jared ended up at the edge of the semicircle, right next to the platform. I kept watching him with a wary eye. Then came the prince's bodyguards, 4 of them taking position directly in front of the dais. And finally, the stars of the show arrived. Under a wave of applause, the prince and the future governor climbed the platform, both in ceremonial attire, both gleaming like polished boots. My fellow citizens, the prince began, his voice unexpectedly deep. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in the history of this star system. And I believe it is only the beginning of a long and prosperous. He kept talking, but I focused entirely on Jared. He'd suddenly withdrawn from the scene, face tense, eyes glued to a tablet that had appeared in his hands. His lips moved silently. He glanced up at the sky once, then back down, fingers tapping rapidly on the screen. The crowd applauded again. Apparently, the prince had finished speaking. I glanced over. He was indeed done and now smiling broadly, arm around the governor's shoulder. The second main speaker stepped up. Friends, I'm proud to see, in this very place, both the native inhabitants and the brave soldiers of our empire, as well as guests from the crown system. The past few years have proven that our new administration is far more effective than the previous one. Just look at our full-fledged ties with the Federation. And so it is with pride I tuned him out. The speech turned my stomach. I looked back at Jared, just in time that he'd set his briefcase down and approached the nearest of my soldiers. Showing him the tablet and gesturing wildly between it and one of the prince's bodyguards, the soldier, clearly not trained for such chaos, stared helplessly, Pretending none of this was happening, that IT might have gone on for a while, but the bodyguard, Jared, was pointing to, gave a short nod and beckoned him closer. It was starting. I wiped my suddenly sweaty hands on my trousers. Jared, still talking energetically, stepped up to the guard, pointed towards some people across the way, and raised the tablet for the soldier to see, now standing just to his side and slightly behind him. The guard looked at the screen for a few seconds, then raised his eyes, scanning the crowd. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the future governor falter mid-sentence. He must have noticed the disruption. And then everything happened at once. Jared's right arm slid affectionately around the bodyguard's waist and, with a deft motion, pulled the pistol from his belt. Smoothly, the weapon turned and pressed under the man's ribs and coughed 3 times. The guard was dead before he hit the ground. For a split second, the world froze. No one could process what had just happened. Jared, meanwhile, dropped the tablet and grabbed the dying man by the neck, using him as a shield against the rest of the security team. I lunged forward, shoving 2 officers aside. The pistol in Jared's hand began to rise, aimed directly at the prince. Too slow for me to stop him. Fast enough that I barely made it onto the platform, pistol in hand. Too late. The black eye of his gun flashed, and I felt a sledgehammer strike my chest, flinging me backward, right into the prince. My arm tried to rise, but too slowly. Jared fired again. I felt the wind of the bullet brush my scalp. Only then did I pull the trigger. Jared flinched. For a moment, he stood there frozen, still holding the gun, still staring into my eyes. Then the weapon slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. I fired again. Full stop. No more questions. There were only 4 of us left. That thought overwhelmed everything, swallowed the world, wrapped my brain in a fog. The world spun, and I lost consciousness. I don't know how long I was out. A day, maybe 2. I woke up at night. Spent a while just looking around. A hospital room, softly lit by night lamps. High-end design. Most likely, I was still on the planet. Probably in the palace. My chest was bandaged and aching, but not unbearably so. Cables and tubes ran to my arm. On the couch by the wall, Sergeant Riley was curled up, fast asleep. I was suddenly overwhelmed with affection. He's awake, a quiet voice said beyond the door. Inform the prince. The door slid open and 2 men in white coats entered. Doctors, I assumed. Hearing footsteps, Riley stirred and sat up, trying not to doze off again. Lights at 50%, one of the men said, and the room brightened a little. So, patient, how do you feel? All right, doctor. My chest hurts, but I guess that's to be expected. No other complaints.